Sleepwalkers is an early 90s horror film with an original Stephen King penned screenplay, and, well, it kinda sucks, but not entirely. It has its moments for sure, but, well, King has a thing he seemingly can't help but do, particularly when it comes to screenplays, that ultimately spoils the mood. Regardless of the screenplay's shortcomings, King manages to branch out into some unfamiliar territory by telling a story that's sort of a bastardized version of Egyptian mythology with a vampiric twist. And he lays the groundwork for a story that he would publish 2 decades later. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. If you like Stephen King, mostly bad 90s horror movies, and incestuous, soul-sucking cat vampire hybrids, which is something that I will not elaborate on further in this video, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I've been feeling reinvigorated about the channel lately after hitting 1,000 subs, and so I've been working hard to churn out videos a little quicker these days, and as a result I didn't have time to come up with or even think about a new costume for this video, so let's just pretend this is not my Church the Cat costume from the Pet Cemetery videos, and that this is in fact my Clovis the Cat costume, which I have never worn before. That's right, I'm Clovis, who is of course a cat you definitely have heard of, a cat who is the true hero of the movie Sleepwalkers, and the most well-known cat in the Stephen King-averse. Yep. Every King fan knows about Clovis the cat. Anyway, we're talking about the 1992 film Sleepwalkers today, which is a lesser-known, less celebrated King film for a number of reasons, all of which are justifiable. However, it's not the aim of this video to aggressively shit all over the movie, but rather I want to talk about the one specific thing that bothered me about Sleepwalkers the most, sing a few praises, look at what I assumed must have been the inspiration for the screenplay, and how Sleepwalkers was perhaps the first draft of a much better story. But first, here is a brief summary of just what Sleepwalkers is all about for those of you who aren't familiar and for those who could use a brush-up. Sleepwalkers, 1992 film. A brief summary. Charles Brady is new in town. He's handsome, polite, charismatic, and charming. He seems like a well-rounded, all-American teenager. Only Charles is not who or what he seems to be. After setting his sights on Tanya Robertson, a classmate and staff member at the local movie theater, Charles gains her trust and her affection. Hell, he might even be catching feelings for her, but Charles doesn't let that get in the way of his plans. Or his mother's. You see, Charles and his mother are sleepwalkers, nomadic, shape-shifting creatures who feed on virgin souls. The sleepwalkers can only be stopped by the deadly scratch of a cat. Yes, they are impervious to bullets, but cats can scratch them to death. They rely on souls to survive, the souls of virgins specifically, and it's Charles's job to capture Tanya's pure virgin soul in order to keep himself and his increasingly impatient mother alive. History and background. As I mentioned earlier, the screenplay for Sleepwalkers was written by Stephen King, and the film was the first feature-length film that King wrote, which was not based on one of his existing stories. Prior to Sleepwalkers, King had written screenplays for a bunch of other films, but we'll be discussing some of those in the next segment. Mick Garris was brought on to direct, and this was the first time King and Garris would collaborate. However, Garris would go on to direct, produce, write for, and act in a handful of additional King film projects in the years that followed. Those projects include the Clive Barker Stephen King mashup TV movie Quicksilver Highway, the box office flop Riding the Bullet, the TV miniseries for Bag of Bones, the 1997 TV version of The Shining, the TV movie adaptation of Desperation, and of course most notably, Garris directed the fondly remembered and still beloved 1994 TV miniseries for The Stand. The cast is made up of mostly unknowns whose careers didn't exactly flourish following Sleepwalkers, though there are a few exceptions. The main cast consisted of Brian Krause as Charles Brady, Alice Krige as Mary Brady, and I looked this up. I looked it up to make sure I was going to pronounce it correctly. Madchen Amick as Tanya Robertson. Krause has a fairly extensive filmography, the majority of which is made up of unrecognizable titles and B-movies, though he did go on to star in the WB series Charmed from 1998 until 2006. Krause was decent in the role of the heartthrob pretty boy, but we'll get into more of that soon. Alice Krige, like Krause, has a massive filmography, only she appeared in a great deal of familiar titles and franchises, including Star Trek, Murder, She Wrote, Beverly Hills 90210, and more recently Thor the Dark World, the OA on Netflix, and the most recent Texas Chainsaw Abomination reboot in 2022. Krige is very dramatic and emotive, perhaps to a fault at times, but she does a mostly decent job. Madchen Amick, whose name I definitely got right that time, do not look it up, appeared in a number of long-running TV shows like ER, Dawson's Creek, and is perhaps best known for playing Shelley Johnson in Twin Peaks. Amick also acted in and directed multiple episodes of my personal favorite TV teen drama motherfucking Riverdale, but I won't hold that against her. Amick is frankly stunning, and her acting was pretty good. King makes his customary cameo as an annoying cemetery groundskeeper, and the one and only Ron...
Listen to me, motherfucker. There's a lot of ways to lose your house.
Perlman appears as Captain Soames, and while it's not one of his best performances, I still enjoyed him in his small role as the overblown asshole cop. The score wasn't super memorable, but it wasn't awful. There were some really mega hair metal music moments that were a bit cheesy, but Brady is a teenager driving a 1980s Trans Am convertible around, so you kind of have to soundtrack that with obnoxious hair metal, right? As for the special effects, well, they were pretty special, all right. The early 90s CGI, if you can even call it that, wasn't great, and the makeup and practical effects were less than remarkable, in my opinion. So yeah, there was a reasonable amount of good stuff in this movie, and for the first half I thought it mostly worked. But then Stephen King did what Stephen King often does in his screenplays, and things went downhill in a hurry. King just can't help himself. This screenplay suffers from the same issue that a lot of King screenplays fall victim to, and is an issue I've had with most of the King-penned screenplays I've discussed so far on this channel. That issue being silly-ass goofball bullshit. Whether it's Creepshow, Cat's Eye, Golden Years, Silver Bullet, King just can't help but throw some cornball gag or wacky zinger in there for that for me totally ruins the mood. And like those aforementioned King-written screenplays, Sleepwalkers is full of them. But not until the second half, and in Sleepwalkers they feel even more forced and out of place than usual. Charles and Tanya are alone in a secluded cemetery, having finally gained her trust and gotten her to let her guard down. Charles prepares to strike. They draw close, they share a moment of intimacy, and it's at this most pivotal moment when Charles Brady begins to transform and tries to suck Tanya's soul out of her mouth or whatever. And then his character and the tone of the film, changes completely. At first it felt like someone doing a lackluster rendition of when Jack Torrance goes off the deep end in The Shining. There's some "here's Johnny" energy, even if it's not anywhere near the caliber of Nicholson's performance. But then it feels a lot more like when Jim Carrey puts the mask on in the movie The Mask. Suddenly Charles is crazy, zany, and crude, and full of jokes and one-liners. And it works in The Mask because it was a comedy to begin with, and because it's supposed to be funny. Also, it's Jim Carrey, and no one can do what he does quite like he does it. So when it happens in Sleepwalkers, it's abrupt, poorly delivered, and just such a drastic tone shift that the severity of the situation that Tanya had found herself in is completely undercut. For example,
Tanya, I don't think you're entering into the spirit of this. Why don't you just think of yourself as lunch? Pika, baby! Just look at his shirt! My mother's gonna kill me! Now, Tanya, when exactly did I lose your trust? I don't believe you fired a warning shot, officer.
the movie goes from dark and dangerous to slapstick comedy, and had King maintained the darker, more threatening tone, it would have done the film a world of good. In fact, the scene in which Brady makes his move to suck the virgin soul out of Tanya's face hole, it feels a whole lot like an essay scene. It's very serious and essay coded. The movie seems to be moving toward a message about consent or bodily autonomy, but instead it turns into a Looney Tunes style chase scene with a dude in bad prosthetics jamming a pencil into a police officer's ear and yelling,
"Cop kebab!"
And this carnival of silly slapstick stupidity continues when Brady's mom goes on the attack. She clunks the heads of two officers together like Moe from the Three Stooges, knocking them out cold, and then during what is my personal favorite moment of the entire movie, she stabs another officer in the back with a corn cob. She stabs him with a leftover corn cob from dinner, and then she says,
"No vegetables, no dessert. Those are the rules."
Ugh, Jesus. Steve, why couldn't you just make a straight-up scary movie? Why did you have to go all creep show on this one? I know you can just play it straight and be scary, so why does practically every screenplay you write have to be some goddamn yuck-em-up zinger fest full of shitty quips and wacky shenanigans? I was planning to rant further about all the other examples of King screenplays that do things like this and stitch together a montage of all of them, but that would have required me to watch all of those movies and shows again, and I simply cannot bring myself to do that. I can't do it. To be fair to King, in movies like Creepshow and Maximum Overdrive, inserting these sillier moments makes sense. It's a part of their appeal and overall vibe. I'm not trying to say it never works and is always in poor taste, only that oftentimes I personally would have enjoyed a lot of King's screenplays a great deal more had he just written a straight-up scary movie without all the tomfoolery, but he just can't resist, and it rarely works for me, particularly in Sleepwalkers. Alright, so what was this screenplay really about? What is the true origin story of the Sleepwalkers, and was it actually based on ancient Egyptian cat worshippers and feline fetishization? Well, we'll discuss that further in the next segment, but first won't you please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and joining me as I discover that I think I know what I'm going to be writing about, but instead realize that it may not actually be relevant to the film at all as I once believed, and now have to completely rethink the direction I'm going to take in the rest of this video? Thanks in advance. Ancient Egyptian cat people. So, based on the opening credits of this movie, I had reasonably assumed that King had been inspired by the Egyptian lore surrounding cats while writing the screenplay. There are Egyptian hieroglyphics and statues showing human bodies with cat heads and ancient texts, as well as some kinda awful drawings, but, well, apparently adding this imagery was not something King had a hand in. It was Mick Garris who felt that adding the Egyptian elements during the opening credits would add some context and sort of explain the origin of the Sleepwalkers. Additionally, at the very beginning of the movie, this title card is shown, and it reads as follows: Sleepwalker, nomadic shape-shifting creatures with human and feline origins, vulnerable to the deadly scratch of the cat. The Sleepwalker feeds upon the life force of virginal human females, probable source of the vampire legend. Chillicothe Encyclopedia of Arcane Knowledge, 1st edition, 1884. Apparently, Garris just made that whole thing up, and the Chillicothe Encyclopedia of Arcane Knowledge is just a fabrication. So if that's the case, then what actually inspired King? Did he have the Egyptians in mind when he wrote the screenplay? Well, I have no idea, honestly. I couldn't find any quotes or info from King himself regarding what inspired the screenplay. But that hasn't stopped folks online from drawing their own conclusions. The following origin story of the Sleepwalkers can be found on fandom.com in the Villain Wiki section, and it reads, quote, "Thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, the Sleepwalkers, shape-shifting earth-born humanoid cat beings, were once worshipped by humans as gods. This was due to the many supernatural abilities they possess, including telekinesis, illusion casting, and most notably the dimming, or the ability to turn themselves as well as any other object or person in their own presence invisible. They exploited their subjects' worship of them to gain human sacrifices, as despite the fact they are immune to nearly any injury, they must feast on the life energy of virgin girls in order to maintain their youth and strength. Unfortunately for the Sleepwalkers, their domination of humanity came to an abrupt end when the humans stumbled across their one weakness. Remarkably, despite their feline origins and appearance in their true form, the supernatural horrors were fatally weak against the common house cat. In addition to being able to see through their illusions, something only cameras were also shown to be capable of doing. House cats' claws and fangs were capable of inflicting wounds that not only weakened Sleepwalkers to the point they can be killed by normal means, but also burned the creatures to the point of even causing them to burst into flames. Once this mortal weakness was discovered, the monsters were renounced by their former worshippers and shunned as demons. Centuries passed, and the Sleepwalkers were branded not just as monsters, but also as witches and warlocks, and sought out to be slain. In order to survive, they went into hiding, nearly forgotten by humanity in the ensuing centuries. The only knowledge of them were the many scattered stories and legends they appeared in, becoming the basis for the legends of the vampire. Due to their species' depleting numbers, the creatures resorted to having incestuous relationships in order to continue the species." Unquote. Now, outside of the title card and opening credits, there was nothing about most of that in the movie. Whoever put that together really used their imagination. I mean, I can see how they might have interpreted and extrapolated some of that from just the opening credits in combination with the events of the film, but I can't help but wonder what King would have to say about all that. I mean, were you to remove the opening credits, there would be no basis for the ancient Egyptian stuff, which was inserted by Garrus after the screenplay was written. So, from what I can tell, King had never written in or intended the Egyptian lore to be a part of this film at all. I had intended to use this segment to discuss Egyptian mythology and the goddess Bastet and the relationship of the ancient Egyptians to cats and how all of that influenced the screenplay, but that seems kinda silly now, considering I can't confirm that King actually had any of that in mind while writing it. And the only instances of ancient Egyptian anything were added to the film after the fact by Garrus. So I'm not going to be discussing any of that, and instead I have left a link below to a video about ancient Egyptian cat lore for anyone who wants some of that in their life. Sleepwalkers and the True Knot. This is just a short aside, but the Sleepwalkers from King's film reminded me a great deal of the True Knot from King's novel Dr. Sleep. Like the Sleepwalkers, the members of the Knot are soul-sucking nomads whose numbers have dwindled. Likewise, they rely on the souls, or as it is called in Dr. Sleep, the steam of young humans, children who are likely also virgins, to survive. Both take lives in order to sustain their own. The Sleepwalkers and the Knot are not immortal, but they both use the souls or the steam to keep them young and extend their lifespans beyond their natural limits. Both the Sleepwalkers and the Knot are nomadic and are constantly on the move to avoid being caught and captured. Both travel from town to town, taking the lives of their victims and hightailing it out of there. I'm not saying that King definitely had the creatures he had created for Sleepwalkers in mind when he wrote Dr. Sleep. I just felt that the parallels between the two groups were notable, and that it is unlikely that King wasn't at least cognizant of the similarities when he wrote Dr. Sleep nearly 2 decades later. Perhaps he saw a chance to take the Sleepwalkers and expand and improve upon that initial idea, to take those fledgling creatures and explore them more thoroughly than a screenplay for a 90-minute film would allow. Final thoughts. Oof, yeah, I can't say that I recommend watching this one, but someone took the liberty of uploading the entire movie in a playlist here on YouTube, so I've linked that below for anyone who, I don't know, for anyone who has masochistic tendencies. It's not an entirely bad movie, but it's bad enough that I was glad when it was over and will definitely not be watching it again. I'm good on all that. Honestly, I could have overlooked or at least lived with the not-so-special effects had King not employed all of his trademark goofy nonsense, but if you're into that sort of thing, who knows, you might enjoy it. In my next video, I'll be discussing King's 1992 novel, Gerald's Game. It's going to be a dark one for sure, so you know, of course, Gerald's Game is a deeply disturbing book, so yeah. I have a feeling it's going to get deeply personal, and I will definitely be talking about a handful of relevant topics. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please click the things, and I'll see you next time. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King. I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this has been A Great Undertaking.